YouTube, how are we? Today we're going to do another sit down style video and we're going to cover how to create a bulking diet or words to that effect. We're going to very briefly touch on establishing initial calories. We're not going to go through any sums and calculations that you sometimes seen being thrown around. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, it's just that I'm going to try and keep this video nice and simple and just run through basically how I would kind of start that initial phase of a bulk with a client. But we're going to then touch quite heavily on the planning and the scheduling of the diet side of the bulk, because it is something that I do believe, particularly once you get to quite high calories, is important in order to keep you on track. A lot of the time people see a bulk as that time where we can relax and just eat whatever we want. Unfortunately, if you want to try and stay in a bulk for as long as possible, you're going to need to keep some level of restriction in there with your surplus. And once you get to the point where calories are particularly high, you are most likely going to benefit from some sort of a schedule, even if it's a fairly relaxed one, in order to help you get in as many calories as possible. So before we dive into the scheduling part of things, let's just touch very briefly on 3 pointers that I would take into consideration when establishing somebody's starting calories on a bulk. So with a client, what I'm always going to get them to do when they first sign up and we first want to make that calculation of their maintenance calories is to get them to fill in a food diary. Over the 7 days, I will get them to just write down every single thing that they eat, and that also includes any drinks that contain calories as well. We can add these numbers up and we can average them out for the week, and as long as their weight has stayed on average the same for that entire week, we know that we have pretty much found their maintenance calories. Maintenance calories simply just means what you need to eat in order to stay the same. That is going to be a moving target. Let's say, for example, you've got one day where you sat at your desk, but then you've got another day when you're going out hiking with friends, for example. Of course, the calorie needs for those 2 days are going to be very different. But again, it's just about finding that average over the week. Once we've got this, we then know that we need to add on 100 to 200 calories in order to begin the transition into that surplus of calories and begin the transition into a bulking phase. 100 to 200 calories is not a lot. For some people, it might not be anywhere near enough in order to see lean tissue, muscle being built. For some people, initially, it might be enough. I would keep yourself on those extra 100 to 200 calories for 1 to 2 weeks, assess progress, and then we can continue to increase from there if we need to, or we can stay on those calories if they're working. So that all sounds very simple. And again, that is just a very simple way of figuring out those starting bulking calories. The third and final note is just on protein. Of course, a standard measurement that gets thrown around is around about 1 gram per pound of body weight. So if you're 130 pounds, you want to be consuming 130 grams of whole protein sources. That's a number that I'm quite happy to give to clients. The only time that we kind of shy away from that number, in my opinion, is if we've got somebody who has got a higher level of body fat, in which case I tend to go more towards the 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. But of course, if you're somebody who's got a higher level of body fat, then really we're not going to be looking at a bulk. We're most likely going to be looking at a cut. Let's talk schedules. So what you might see being thrown around is training day and non-training day calories. Now, I personally have these. I'm going to use myself as a bit of an example here. So on average, on a training day, I'll consume around about 3,000 calories. On a non-training day, I will consume around about 2,800 calories. This isn't something that I did from the get-go. If you've never done any kind of a bulk before, or you're just starting out on a bulk, or if I'm being honest, you're just a skinny guy who just wants to put on lean tissue, honestly, this just isn't needed. I'm not saying you couldn't do it. I'm not saying you can't have different calorie requirements for training days and non-training days. But if we're looking to keep it nice and simple, could you just run 3,000 calories every day? Or could I just run 3,000 calories every day? For sure. However, because I'm now at the point where food has been pushed quite high and I'm trying to be as considerate of my overall health as I can be. So for example, the first thing that comes to mind when carbs are pushed quite high is that we're playing around with insulin sensitivity. I'm gonna look towards having slightly reduced carbs on a rest day. Now, some would say, but that's silly because carbs go towards recovery. And in some ways you're right, it's a bit of a give or take. Yes, on one hand, we've got the recovery element of the carbs, but I've also, again, got to consider overall health things like insulin sensitivity, for example. I'm consuming plenty of carbs even on a non-training day. It's not like I'm dropping them so low I'm not going to be recovering. Performance is still very good in the gym. I'm progressing how I want to. So the way that I'm running the split at the minute is, in terms of percentages, we've got 50% carbs on a training day, 25% protein and 25% fat. And then on a non-training day, we drop down to 40% carbs, still at 25% protein. And then we've got the extra 10%, so up to 35% in terms of fat. Again, if you're looking to just keep this as simple as possible, basically just ignore everything I've just said then, and we'll move on to the next section. Meal plan versus if it fits your macros. Now, I don't need to dive too deeply into this section because I'm going to link above me my previous video where I literally covered this topic of meal plans versus if it fits your macros. But to very briefly summarize, there are two main positives to the meal plan, and there's two main positives to the if it fits your macros. So meal plans are good for if you've got a busy work day or a busy social day, for example, and you need to just know what you're going to be eating, when you're going to be eating it, and it's all prepped and ready to go. It's also good for high calories. Once you're starting to push a considerable amount of calories, it's very, very difficult to solely just use if it fits your macros, particularly if you're a busy person. Trust me, I've been there. I've got in from work. I've got like an hour till I need to go to bed, and I'm trying to like cram like 100 grams of dry pasta into my body because I've got no idea of what else I can have. I'm just trying to get the calories in. So it is sometimes good to have a plan. But then we've also got the side of if it fits your macros. Good for days off / when you're not busy, and also allows you to eat out so we can maintain that social life and just generally enjoy life. Personally, what I would take from this is that using a combination of both is very, very beneficial for a bulk. Maybe having some sort of a set plan Monday to Friday, and then maybe over the weekend you go with more of an if it fits your macros style. That's just, one idea. Or you could have some meals planned during the day, so maybe you've got a set breakfast, lunch and snacks, and then dinner is more of an if it fits your macros approach. There's a lot of ways you can go about it. Like I say, when you first start out and maybe calories aren't too high, you can get away with an if it fits your macros approach. But once calories are pushed to a pretty high surplus and you're having to eat a lot of food, you might find some benefit to having some sort of a schedule. Okay, everybody's favorite, let's talk food. So what I've done here is listed some protein sources, some carb sources, and some fat sources that I basically just always try to have in the cupboard. And then obviously there's obviously a million other types of food that we can have on top of this, but these are some quote unquote basics. So protein, we've got chicken, beef, tuna, whey, skyr, eggs, and I've also written meat-free products. So veggies out there that obviously don't eat chicken, beef, meat products, etc. As long as you're veggie and not vegan, we can obviously have the eggs, we can have the skyr, we can have the whey, and then we can add in some meat-free products like Quorn, Linda McCartney. There's so many options now, it's sort of endless. Not all of them are unfortunately going to be whole protein sources, so you might have to kind of double up on some portions there. But as long as you're also getting in some things like eggs, skyr, whey on top of that, then you should be golden. I personally am a vegetarian, so I'm speaking from experience here. Carbs. So we've got our basics: rice, pasta, potato, cereal, bagels, and fruit and veg. So let's start from the top. Things like rice and pasta, if you're somebody who is needing to cook in a hurry or you just generally kind of strapped for time, having like some microwavable little packets, so like the Ben's Original Rice if you're in the UK, Dolmio little pasta pouches if you're in the UK, they're amazing to have. Potato, obviously we've got a couple of options. We've got white potato, sweet potato. Cereal, obviously options are endless. Personally, cereal topped with some whey protein is my go-to post-workout. We've got bagels, obviously any kind of bread really. And then I've thrown in fruit and veg. Obviously fruit in particular is a fantastic carb source, But I wanted to make a special note here, please, 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 and I stress this to all clients that are bulking, because you are bulking does not mean that you can neglect your 5 a day. We need to be getting those micronutrients in. Health is equally as important when we are bulking as when we're cutting. So do not miss out on fruit and veg. Try and get it in with every meal. It's definitely not something to miss off. We want to be putting health first. And then fats, so nuts and seeds, olive oil. Little tip, maybe sounds a little bit gross, but it has come in handy if I've been strapped for time. If you need to get some extra fats in and you've still got some protein left for the day to get in as well, add some olive oil into your whey protein. I know that probably sounds like one of the worst things ever. I can hardly taste it, and it is a great way of getting in some extra fats. Oily fish, so obviously that's going to cross over nicely into the protein as well. Something like a salmon, if you have that in the morning, like salmon, eggs, maybe on a bagel, that's obviously a fantastic breakfast to have there. And then dark chocolate is a nice fat source to have as well. You can mix that into some oats also being a good carb source. Cream of rice as well also being another good carb source. So we've covered working out those initial calories and macros just as a very basic guide. We've covered the possibility of having different calories and different macro percentages on training and non-training days, although like I say, if you're looking for a very simple approach just to get started, that's definitely not necessary. We've covered some kind of cupboard basics. The last thing really to go over is just how we're going to lay that out during the day. So really, there are no strict guidelines in terms of how you need to lay that food out. Of course, I would try and break it down into at least 3 meals per day so that you're not cramming in 2 huge meals, which is obviously not going to be good for digestion. So I would try to break that down into a minimum of 3 meals, but of course, once calories start getting pushed up higher, you're going to find that maybe you're having sort of 4 to 5 meals per day, maybe even more if you're a bigger individual. Really, for me, what I try to stress with clients is if we can get a good schedule around the workout window, the rest of the day will fall into place nicely, because we can, during the rest of the day, we can make sure that we're having meals that have got protein, carb, fat source, and some veggies or fruit in there. Nothing really needs to be too structured in those meals other than making sure we're ticking those boxes. Around that peri-workout window, so pre and post. Pre, we've got 2 decisions. We can either train fasted or train with food in our stomach. Ultimately, in my opinion, that's gonna come down to time. If you're somebody who wakes up in the morning and you've got to be at the gym within 30 minutes to an hour, really we're probably going to be looking at training fasted, in which case, is that ideal for a bulk? Possibly not, because it means that we've then got even more food to eat later on. But if we've got work commitments, that's life. Really, the only important thing there is to make sure that we've got plenty of water in the system before training fasted. Minimum of 500 ml, ideally as close to a litre as we can. If you've got a couple of hours before training that we can fill with food, we can have really a meal that is quite varied in terms of macros. So if you've got 2 to 3 hours, we can have a fairly big meal that's full of carbs, protein and fat. If you've not got as long until you're training to say you're having something smaller, maybe an hour to 2 hours pre-workout, we're probably going to be looking more so at a meal or a snack that is mainly carbs and protein, because obviously we don't want to be having too much fat, because that's going to slow down the absorption of the carbohydrates into the system. Post-workout, personally I always run it with most clients, trying to break it down into 2 separate meals. So around about 30 to 45 minutes when we've got the nervous system back into a parasympathetic state, so that rest and digest state, and we're able to start taking on food. What I like to do is get something, what I would call quick carbs, into the system alongside of some protein. So maybe something like a shake, that's just a nice easy protein source, with maybe some fruit or some cereal or a bagel with some jam, for example. Around about 2 to 3 hours post-workout, we can then go in with a bigger meal where we also include some more fats in there. Honestly, it could be anything. So we're looking at anything from like eggs on toast with maybe some ham mixed into it, or something maybe bigger like a chicken and rice and veggies and that kind of stuff. Honestly, anything, as long as we're ticking those boxes of protein, carbs, fat, and ideally some veggies in there as well. So I think that has basically covered how to lay out a bulking diet nice and simple. Like I say, I wanted this video to very much center around a beginner, but also have some advice in there that's helpful to people that have already got started on their bulking journey. As always, if you found this video helpful, please drop a like. Any questions, drop them down below. Subscribe if you are new around here, and I will see you all in the next one.